Today I would like to talk about the inconvenience of rookies in the League of Legends pro scene. What I will specifically talk about is the North American professional LCS scene and a little bit of my small region in Japan. So, the first thing I would like to talk about rookies is the very high demand people seem to have for these rookies. Like every team wants good rookies, but nobody wants to take that first step forward to develop them. And you see it on Reddit all the time, people complaining, oh, this guy's trash, this guy's not good, what was that? But if you don't give them a chance to like properly develop and train, how do you expect anyone to be good? So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. You're going to have to lose a little bit to take that chance and to properly develop these players. If these players aren't good, then you can always bench them. But if you only give them a few games to try, or one split maybe, if you give him one split and he's terrible, then maybe you have the wrong coaching staff. Maybe he wasn't the right player for your team. Maybe there's other things going on outside of the game itself, and the team environment was terrible. There are a lot of theories and like hypotheses you can think of about why these teams would fail, or why these players in specific would fail. A good example would be Saligo. So when Saligo was picked up for 100 Thieves in 2019, he only played a few games in LCS, then he was dropped for Ryu. Ryu came back into the mid lane and had to try to help this team out. So I wouldn't say like, and now he's back in the Academy League. I feel kind of, I think it's really unfortunate for that situation. Because when the team is going like 0-8, like maybe 100 Thieves were going 0-8, but if you're in like last place, or if you're in the bottom of the standings, then the rest of the team don't really have the motivation to win. They don't have the motivation to try. So when you are very motivated and you're a new player and you're surrounded by players that aren't willing to try, that can be an issue. That can be demotivating. You see players like this all the time with like Echo Fox, where a player called Panda was subbed in, and he only played a few games. Or you have random players just come in, play a few games, and they're back in Academy, you never see them again. Players or fans look at this, say, hey, they played a few games, he's terrible in those games, he should be kicked out, he shouldn't be in LCS. And then you have issues where maybe players are overstaying, where they're playing for a very long time in Academy or in LCS. They're not good enough to be a LCS pro, but they're not bad enough that they can't be like an amateur player. So the Academy system is kind of in a weird spot right now, because if you look at North America compared to, let's say, Europe, there's a completely different level of talent being developed. Not just like raw talent, I mean like how they're developing the talent. So if you ever watch the European national leagues, there are a lot of teams. So I took a look at the national leagues, and there's so many leagues, so many teams, and then there's teams underneath that league. It gets really confusing, gets really overwhelming. So it is not very easy to follow every league in the national leagues. North America, you have the amateur scene, but it's very small. It's not very well developed. It's a very like kind of budgetary thing. Whereas like in Korea, you have like the Kespa Cup invites those amateur teams. You do have like a system to have like, you have the main league, you have the secondary league, and then you have a bunch of amateur leagues. So in Europe, you have the main league, you have, I guess, Masters would be like a secondary league, and underneath that you have a bunch of different leagues all feeding into the master system. And I think that is because of the way Europe is set up. It's not a country, it's a continent. So you have multiple different countries, multiple different regions, all playing on the EU West server, or EU Nordic East server, I believe what it's called. You have different players, different teams. It's a lot of chance to develop these new talents. There's probably about, like, if I had to guess, I would say there would be about like maybe 50 different teams in EU Masters. I could be wrong, or yeah, in the Master League, National League system, I would say there's about 50 teams, maybe even more. I think there's probably more. Anyways, that's not the point. But the point is that North America doesn't have a system to develop that. No one wants to take a chance to develop those players. And I feel like it's a very missed opportunity. I feel like there should be teams looking towards the future. I feel like a lot of esports teams, especially in the bottom teams, aren't thinking long term, and I feel like that really hurts the organization. And people in North America are overspending for these players. They get poor results. You finish ninth or like eighth. It's like it really doesn't matter. Like I feel like getting fifth place in like the LCS to LEC is terrible. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make any sense to try to pay money to get fifth place. Because if you had to ask like any fan, hey, who was the fifth place team in 2019 spring? I don't even remember who was fifth. Like, how do you remember that? Like, I guess it would have to be like off the top of my head, maybe Clutch. No, they finished. No, they're bottom. They were ninth place because they had Piglet that year. Yeah. So that's exactly my point. Like, I can't remember. But if you ask who won spring 2019, it was Team Liquid who got second. It was TSM. And then in the third and fourth place match, it was Cloud9 and... No, there was no third and fourth place match. It was Cloud9 and some other team got third and fourth. But, yeah. So that's like, already it's kind of like, huh? You can't remember. It's hard to tell. Like, you don't know what's going on. So, it's like, what is the point of trying to aim for fifth? I feel like if you take a look at other sports, like traditional sports, like maybe basketball, where they have a draft system, you can see teams get lower seeding so they can get a better draft. And that can make sense. But there's no draft system in League, but you can look at it a different way. You can think of it as a development year. So my theory was always, hey, let's say you're a 10th place team. Maybe you don't have that much money, you can't go out crazy and get the big players. If I was a general manager and I looked at the off season and I said, hey, we don't have enough money to get the players we need to be the best team, because you need 3 resident players that are really good and 2 imports that are really good. So depending on the budget, who's available, you could clearly tell if your team's going to be a contender for Worlds or not. And if you feel like your team isn't going to contend for Worlds, I would say, okay, let's cut back on costs. Let's get 10 players to develop. And I would spend less on the players because, rookie players or players with no experience aren't very they're not very expensive to get. Whereas you can get a very good coaching staff to help develop those players. And if you spend money like that, you spend 1 year, you try to find maybe 3, you get 10 resident players, maybe try to get 3 of the best residents or up and coming players. If you develop 3 of those players out of 10, then you have a team that can go to Worlds. Maybe a team that can win the playoffs and go to, be the champions of the LCS, LEC, whatever. But you never see that. Every season, if you look at the bottom team, like the worst team in the LCS, it's always a team that's like pretty stacked. They're spending quite a bit of money on middle to bottom tier players. They're trying to like win, but it's really not working. If you look at the academy team, they're not really trying to develop talent. You can kind of tell by the coaching staff who they have, how much they care, how much you hear about these players. And if you just look at the standings, I think they speak for themselves when you see how bad some of these teams really are. So I think that this has to get resolved as quickly as possible if you want North America to survive. And even in my own region, in the LGL, you can see teams not pick up any rookies. This season has been a little bit different because of the COVID-19 issue. But if you look at generally, we have maybe 1 or maybe 2 or 3 new faces in the entire year. For the most part, you don't see any new players. Because why bother? It's, why would I get a no-name player? Everyone's trash. NA has no talent. Japan has no talent. I hear it all the time. But whenever a new player comes up, people have to ask, if NA has no talent, where does Blabber come from? Where does Licorice come from? Then people say, oh, that's just one player. That's just one guy that's new. But then you think, okay, how about someone like maybe Hakuho or Vulcan? These players aren't very like well known. They're not. They came up in the last few years as being like great players. So when you see it like that, you start to think and wonder, wait a minute, there might be something wrong with this academy system, with the scouting system. Like, how can these players not get picked up? You have players like Tactical, who was on the TSM Academy team. Now he's playing for Team Liquid. He's doing really well, but he never had a chance. Like, Johnson is a new player. He's doing really well. How come all these players from North America are just popping up out of nowhere? There's something wrong with... So you have to try to break it down and try to find what is the problem. Is it the coaching staff? Is it the scouting team? Like, is it the developmental structures? Like, what are we doing that's wrong? And I can't say that. That's for the teams to look into. But if I had to guess, I would say scouting is probably a big issue. Developing the talent, actually caring about the academy system to try to develop players and try to like you grow them using their LCS team with failed veterans, just recycling talent over and over again. It's like there has to be a point at which it has to stop. If you look at the LEC, they're developing really, really well. They have a lot of good new players. There's new players all the time coming into the LEC. You have a bunch new players, and you can say that's because there's more players in Europe. Well, you can say that, but then if you look at other regions, we'd have to compare North America to another smaller region, because even though North America has a lot of money, they don't have a lot of players. So you'd have to look at Brazil, maybe even like Vietnam, Taiwan, like those regions that are probably smaller than NA or around the same size as NA. I don't know the exact numbers on those regions, but you get the point. There's talent out there. You have to try to find them and develop them. You have to give them a chance to develop. You have to, instead of overpaying for that import who might bump your team up from 7th place to 6th place, you should use that money to get a really good coach or a really good like infrastructure to develop these players. These are all issues, and the fans need to you have to communicate these things to the fans so the fans understand what is happening. Because not to fans have their place. I don't want to shit on the fans, but when you have fans, if you lie to the fans, say we're here to win worlds, we're here to win the LCS, then obviously fans are going to be like, then what the fuck do you have with this guy for? Why is this guy playing? This guy's terrible. What is going on? If the fans right or wrong, that's irrelevant. The fans are fans. The fans are important. They have a place in every community. You need fans, or else you can't have an esports scene. So that's unfortunate, but you have to deal with the situation. If you had a general manager or a PR guy come out and say, hey, this year we're developing new talent, and if you actually say, these are the 10 players we're going to develop, and you show all these new names, all these new faces, a normal fan won't know, like, if that guy's good or if that guy's bad. They'll be like, oh, okay, it's a developmental year. Okay, I understand. So if the team finishes like 10th place, if your expectation is so low, you think they'll develop 10th place. If they develop like 9th or 8th, the fans will be a lot more excited and be like, oh, that guy's doing really well. He's developing into a really good player. But if you lie to them and say, hey, we're here to develop players, then you just bring up a bunch of veterans, then obviously the fans can smell bullshit and they'll know to call it out. So try to keep this video short. I think the leagues around the world, the leagues that are having trouble, the fans have to help support these new players, and the orgs need to actually support these new players. Fans can be harsh. The orgs need to be able to defend those players. Say, hey, we're here to develop these players. We're here to give them a chance. Because if no one else will give them a chance, how are you going to find new talent? You're always going to have the same mediocre players just rotating into your league. I think a team has to take a chance of some of these players. We'll see with 100 Thieves when they're bringing in contracts and a new player called Pume. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but it's the new support player. So we'll see new players. Immortals is bringing in Alorim and Insanity. That's going to be very fun and exciting to see if those players can do well. So I am very happy and I'm very excited to see these new positive changes. These are all good changes. I don't, because Immortals is doing terrible. They're not going to Worlds. Their goals shouldn't be going to Worlds. Their goals should be looking at 2021, 2022. And I think that's what a good general manager would do. You plan for the future. You say, what is our goal? You want to go to Worlds. Okay, when? Tomorrow. Okay, then you'll need this amount of money and these players. Can't do that, then you have to think, okay, how about 2022? If we want to go to Worlds by 2022, what do we have to do? Like, okay, we'll do this. Make a plan. I don't see any plans from these teams, and that is what is troubling. It makes no sense that a giant company, like a giant team, doesn't seem to have a long-term plan for the players, even though most companies have a long-term plan for like their business structure. So that is one of the things that I worry about the LCS and the LGL. Hopefully, we can see those changes soon. I'm very excited to see these new players coming in for the LCS, and I will be tuning in this weekend when it does happen. So thank you for watching.